Hello and welcome to Eagle Forum's YouTube channel. This is Colleen Holcomb and I'm joined by Schlafly Cori. We're here to discuss episode 6 of Mrs. America. This episode focuses on Jill Ruckelshaus. The episode begins with, it shows the feminists in the White House, and then Phyllis and her supporters are picketing outside the White House. And there seems to be a big deal. There's a close-up of Phyllis being behind the gate, looking in on the White House. And then there's a scene where Jill drives up and has kind of a satisfied look on her face. The clear indication is they're insiders. Phyllis was an outsider. And there seems to be this notion that Phyllis always wanted to be an insider and never was. It seems like that's something that they're
So, Colleen, you worked with her. You know that she never could have been an insider. Her power came by being an outsider, by being a grassroots activist, by being able to disagree with the policies that were happening on the inside, because she kept to her platform, her faith, her ideals, and she never cut them to fit this year's fashions. So it shows her picketing Betty Ford, but she also picketed Rosalynn Carter. She was equal opportunity in picketing at the White House, no matter which party was in power. And the reason why she was picketing is because she took issue with first ladies getting involved in constitutional amendments, because constitutional amendments are ratified with a supermajority of Congress and then a supermajority of the states. The executive branch has no role in ratifying a constitutional amendment. And Phyllis Schlafly's argument against Betty Ford and Rosalynn Carter is that they were using White House materials, taxpayer funded for the executive branch, in order to lobby on behalf of a constitutional amendment, and they should have no role in it.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And we used to hear this all the time from members of Congress, members of various administrations. They've even said Phyllis Schlafly would have been wasted in Congress. We're so thankful that she didn't just have one vote. She was able to impact so many votes and so many issues. And you're absolutely right. She was an equal opportunity accountability provider, and she was always equipped with the facts. And it didn't matter. You're right. It didn't matter what her audience, who her audience was. What Phyllis cared about was the constitutional principles. That's exactly right. It seems that the series, I don't know about you, but early on, it seemed like we were watching historical fiction and they kind of got Phyllis wrong, but some things were right. Now, as I watch the episodes, I don't recognize Phyllis at all. It looks like a Phyllis robot. I don't recognize any of the characteristics that they're trying to ascribe to her. For example,
agreed. They've gone off into a dark way, and they've tried to take away her charm, the reasons she had success. They're not there, and instead they've made up scenes so that they can get zingers in it. And so Jill Ruckelshaus has a zinger over a cocktail with Phyllis Schlafly. Well, I watched a YouTube of Jill Ruckelshaus who said, no, that never happened, that she never had any kind of interaction on that. But they just wanted to have a good dialogue from the writers, even though it's not only historically inaccurate, it's inaccurate to their personalities.
It seems that way. There's a character named Pam, and it seems like the series is setting up the notion that Phyllis had these very devoted supporters and that she just kind of left them. In this episode, Pam clearly has an abusive husband, and Phyllis is seen as uncaring and just running off. And another of the attributes they're trying to apply to her. Callous, right. And that she's seeking power, that she's much more interested in promoting herself than she is caring about the people who have volunteered on her behalf. Is any of that accurate?
Well, I think both of us have known many women who worked alongside of Phyllis Schlafly for decades. And one of the things that really you get, and you don't have to talk to many women before you realize there are thousands of them who are intensely loyal to Phyllis. And they were intensely loyal at the time and still today because they felt as though Phyllis Schlafly was on their side and that Phyllis Schlafly was supportive and she was a champion for them and their issues. And I certainly knew women who would come to my mother with their personal problems to seek advice. My mother would talk about the help that she would give to women who were in need. I mean, women felt as though she was somebody that they could confide in. And they did. I know they did because I saw it happen.
That's right. I saw that too. And even you saw it in your home. I saw that too. So often Phyllis would tell me personal details, very loving, very caring. I know you had mentioned, I believe it was in one of the interviews that you did, there was this notion being promoted in the previews of the program that Phyllis was mean. And you said she was intimidating, she was intense, she was a hard worker, but Phyllis was never mean. In fact, I think she was extremely personally sensitive and very, very, not only supportive of and promoting of her eagles, we call them, the volunteers and the people who work with her, but she really did deeply care about them. That's right.
Of course she did, but she was also short and to the point. In other words, she liked to get down to business very quickly. She didn't enjoy chit chat. She wanted to get to the point and get over it and get on to the next point. And she did that partly because she was so painfully shy, but also because she had a lot on her list to accomplish each day, and she didn't want to waste time not accomplishing her tasks. So when you are when you are very directed like that, you come across as intimidating, and maybe people would consider that as cold. But the fact of the matter is, my mother led an organization of women, and if you're cold, power mad, and mean, women are not going to stick around.
No, that's absolutely right. Yeah, now this episode focuses primarily on Jill, so there's not as much Phyllis, but we are introduced to a character named Lottie Beth Hobbs. Are you familiar with Lottie Beth?
Lottie Beth Hobbs was quite a woman, and she ran her own organization in Texas called Women Who Want to Be Women. And she had a long, full life. In fact, she passed away at the same year my mother did, in 2016. And Lottie Beth Hobbs was on the board of Eagle Forum at the beginning, and they worked together to put on this huge event in Houston where they took over the Houston Astrodome for the very first pro-family rally. And Lottie Beth was her own force of nature. And it's important to remember that Lottie Beth Hobbs was a single woman. And this show tries to make this idea that Phyllis Schlafly was mean to women who were not married. And as a matter of fact, many of her key supporters and leaders were unmarried women. And Phyllis Schlafly was never tried to undercut any single woman at all. That was not who she was. She wasn't this dividing line between the marrieds and the unmarrieds. And Lottie Beth is a good example of a single woman who had enormous power and influence and was aligned with Phyllis Schlafly.
And the series seems to indicate that Phyllis was also condescending, both to Lottie Beth and to her supporters who are from different faiths. And there's a scene where Phyllis is saying, look to your left and look to your right. You might not be able to save the person sitting next to you, but you can be nice to them. Was Phyllis condescending?
No, not at all. She was never condescending to anyone. She always kept the end goal as the most important thing, that we have a job to do, and here is our goal that we're going to achieve this year, and here's how we're going to do it.
And actually that line that was attributed to her, I've heard her use that to describe the way people came together just naturally. So it wasn't something that Phyllis had to lead and say, okay, you might not like each other, but try to get along. It's really remarkable that there never was any of that because people were so united in purpose against the Equal Rights Amendment.
And she did bring together people of different faiths, people who had not worked or known of people of other faiths. She brought them together and I think forged lifetime friendships across religious differences.
She really did, and brought new people into the political movement who had never been political before, which is truly remarkable. Phyllis is shown as hunting and being somewhat cruel. It was, I think a lot of people were really surprised to see Phyllis wearing pants and drinking brandy, I think it was. Can you comment on that? Is any of that accurate?
This is Hollywood fictionalizing in a huge way, because none of those things. My mother was not an outdoors person. My mother never hunted a deer. My mother didn't wear pants. My mother didn't drink brandy or scotch. I mean, just they're making it up out of whole cloth, because this is I think they've projected their anxieties onto this characterization of Phyllis Schlafly. As if they were Phyllis, what would they do? Would they be this, this cold-hearted hunter able to take the single shot? Because maybe that's how they felt when they were in debate with her.
I think that's incredibly insightful. You're absolutely right. And there's a very controversial scene where Phyllis is shown in a confessional, which I know has been extremely offensive to many Catholics, to show a scene inside a confessional like that. But Phyllis is shown as really tormented, particularly surrounding the issue regarding her brother John. I've heard you speak about how your family dealt with that issue, and it sounds like it just really wasn't much of an issue. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Well, my mother's deep faith informed her views on human sexuality, which meant that she firmly believed that the proper role of sex is between a husband and a wife. And that's certainly how she lived her life. But as she said, she can't control the behavior of other people. They have to make their own decisions and chart their own course. But for my mother, she found great satisfaction and love in married life, and she wished that upon everybody else.
Sure, and I think Phyllis really showed you can have very strong principles and have ideas that other people might disagree with, but it doesn't mean that you hate people who have different ideas.
Well, I think she hoped to model the behavior that other people would like to emulate.
And I wish they would. All right, well, that's all we have for episode 6. Please join us as we review episode 7 as we're getting close to the finale of Mrs. America. Thank you so much, Anne.
You're welcome.